And as you know from our new website, we offer everything from free weekly audio podcasts to our Astro Library, to our multimedia course, and certification for students who love to do homework. Now, the Astro Library is a new feature on our website, and we have taken all of the dozen years of audio and video files by all of our EA pros, and we put them into 3 different sections of the library that are live streaming on a monthly basis, 6 months, 12 months, or you can do a recurring monthly subscription to any section or all sections. And then our multimedia course, of course, is divided up into 3 different segments. Many of you have already heard me say that I have just finished up 10 years of teaching monthly audio classes on segment 1. It's turned out to be over 250 hours archived in the students area of our website, and your purchase of any segment of our course gives you access to all of those archived audio files. Starting in January, the beginning of next year, I will start in on monthly webinar classes on segment 2. And we will start right off going through all of the homework assignments and helping people understand that subject of astrology when it starts to get complicated with 2 or more people, intimate or family. And so thank you very much for allowing us to show you what we offer at the Evolutionary Astrology Network. And at this point, I'm going to ask Leroy to turn the screen over to Laura. And we are very excited to have Laura here as a speaker. She has one of the richest histories in the world of evolutionary astrology. Jeffrey Wolf Green showed up on her family bookstore's doorstep many, many moons ago, and Laura was just a young blood right then, and so I'm going to let Laura give us a little bit of background information on herself and how she practices astrology, especially evolutionary astrology today. And so once again, Laura, welcome, and thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Kim, and thank you, Leroy, for having me. Yes, it's such a part of my life. I sometimes don't think about how long I've been in evolutionary astrology. In fact, I was never trained any other way. And it's true, Jeffrey did come to our bookstore in 1976, and I was young. I was 17 at the time. And I was there in the process of him developing his material, took his classes, and had the delight and privilege to hang out with him every day for many years as he was in the bookstore and I worked in the bookstore. You know, he's like a big brother to me, and this material is sort of embedded now in my consciousness, embedded in my DNA in a way. So I wanted to check and make sure to see if the poll is being launched, because we have a poll to ask you all about your knowledge of aspects and phases, and this workshop is going to be on a very specific, 2 specific aspects, but it will cover all the phases. We'll be dealing with the 8 harmonic aspects, which are the half squares, the semi-squares, and the sesquiquadrates, and really kind of taking a look and seeing if they are as minor as traditional, classic, and even some modern astrology thinks they are. So if you'll all take a moment to answer the poll question, we'll do that, and then we'll move forward.
Thank you, Laura. We have 3 out of 5 that have voted, so we'll just wait another 20, 30 seconds, and that should get everybody's input. And then that'll give you a track to run on with your presentation.
Yeah. Great.
Okay. We'll close the poll now and share the results. So there you go. As you can see, it's about somewhere in the middle, an even keel. 2 out of 3 are kind of right in the middle of their understanding. I'm sure it's one of the most important parts of evolutionary astrology, understanding everything in relation, every cycle in relation to every other cycle, so to speak, or planet to planet for sure.
Right. Thank you. So we'll just we'll move on from that. And I just wanted to let everyone know, as I always do in a workshop or lecture, that if you have questions, feel free to put those out there, and we will answer them as we go along. This material is technical at times and deep for sure, and can be, particularly if your knowledge is not as deep, can be a bit confusing. So that's we'll go ahead. Now, Leroy, I just want to make sure everybody's got my screen before I continue.
Yes, it looks good. I certainly do. So you're all set. And yeah, it's kind of nice, the webinar format for technical information like this, because we'll always have the recording to refer back to.
Great. So let's just start with some basic definitions of what a phase is, because before we get to really talking about the aspects themselves, we really have to understand what a phase is. And so we'll quickly go through this, particularly if your knowledge is kind of right in the middle. And so a phase itself is an angular relationship between any two planets. It's basic. We're looking at the mathematical and angular relationship between any two planets, and that helps us define the phase the two planets are in. There are 8 phases that any two planets can be in, and each of those phases is 45 degrees in size. So if we take 8 and multiply it by 45, we'll get the full 360-degree circle. And each phase itself contains a number of aspects. And so and you'll see in a minute what that looks like. So just know that each phase contains a number of aspects. And also to know that an aspect is a very specific and limited angular relationship between two planets. So to know that every pair of planets themselves can be in a phase, but not every pair of planets is going to be in an aspect. So you might have your sun-moon that you were born under the phase of the moon. You might be born at the full moon, but they might not actually be in an opposition to one another, because they might not be an orb to one another. And every aspect has an orb or a variance of what I call a variance in either side that we allow for the aspect to encompass. So we'll just move on. So here is the circle. It is the same circle that you're looking at for any circle, really, when you're dealing with astrology. It's 360 degrees. Normally, in a chart, you see that circle divided into 12 pieces. In phases, we have divided it into 8, and we have those 8 phases. We've got the new phase, crescent, first quarter, gibbous. Let me get my little spotlight here. So we have gibbous, full, disseminating, last quarter, and balsamic. We're going to go through all of that, so don't worry about it. And you can see that within each phase, you can see where the aspects fall within these phases. All right, so they're each of them, though, for instance, the sextile at 60 degrees, that's the exact moment, the exact degree of that aspect, but we allow 5 degrees on either side for that aspect to actually be in operation. All right, so make sure you let me know if you have any questions, you need me to slow down, any of those kinds of things. So let's kind of take a little bit deeper look at these phases and get some more information. All right, now why isn't my screen actually moving? That's very odd. Let's go back to this, see if that has something to do with it. Ah, there we go. It was there. Okay. So each phase has an energetic orientation. Yang is energy that it's expressing itself out. It's active. It's externalized. It's masculine energy. It reacts. And so there's an extroverted quality to that energy, meaning that energy is moving out and away from the center. Yin energy is energy that moves back in toward the center. So this is receptive. It is internal and introverted, and I don't mean shy. I just mean energy moving in. It does not receive its energy from the outer world. Its energy is generated from within. It is yielding, and its strength comes from yielding and being able to give. So you can see that each phase has this energetic orientation, and there are 4 yang. That's the new phase, the first quarter, full, and last quarter. And then we have our 4 yin phases. This is crescent, gibbous, disseminating, and balsamic. All right, and it's really important to know these orientations because it gives us some basic information so that when any 2 planets are in a yang phase, new first quarter, full, or last quarter, we know these planets are carrying this energy of extroversion, that the energy moves out and it's active in its energy. And then conversely, when we have 2 planets in a yin phase, this is an internalizing process. It's much more receptive and taking energy in. And you can have, for instance, as an example, 2 planets in Aries. Let's say you have your sun moon in an Aries. They're both in Aries, but they're in balsamic, meaning that the sun is in a higher degree of the same sign and the moon is behind it. So this gives that quality of very watered, almost Pisces-like quality, very yin. It tones down that active Aries energy. And then again, if we take 2 planets and put them, say, in Cancer or Pisces, the sun moon, and we put the moon ahead of the sun in a larger degree of that sign, and we get a new phase, it externalizes that naturally water yin sign that if the 2 planets were in Pisces. All right, hopefully everybody's following that.
Yes, Laura, this might be a good time for this initial.
Finding that I have to.
Sometimes on your PowerPoint, the magic of the right click will get it to, you can choose next slide. But is this a good time to take a simple question on orbs?
Sure, absolutely.
The question came in, what are the orbs for the phases? And then I might extend that just for clarification as opposed to orbs for aspects.
I personally don't use orbs for phases. I was taught a long time ago by Jeffrey, many moons ago, and back then I don't know what the standard EA is now, but back then we did not use orbs for phases. We only used orbs for aspects, in which I will cover. I have a slide for that. Hopefully that answered your question, and if not, then we can assist that along further.
Thank you.
So each of the phases has a key word or key phrase, and this will help you understand its energy, where it's coming from. And so any 2 planets that are in a new phase are going to be quite instinctive, and they're going to have a sense of instinctual emergence, like the Aries quality, like the Aries energy itself, the energy of the Aries archetype. We'll dig deeper into these in a little bit, so I just want to go over the basic components of these. So we have plenty of time to get more in depth into all of this. The crescent phase is long known as the phase of struggle. Now, in my world, the intention of crescent is not necessarily to struggle, but it is about the struggle to define the value, meaning, and purpose of what was initiated in the new phase. So it is a very yin internalized struggle. We'll get to that in more in depth in a bit. The first quarter, crisis in action. Any two planets in this phase carry this yang energy of trying to or attempting to initiate action based on the value that was hopefully determined or come to in the crescent phase. And I've often called this sort of an awkward process because it is now just trying to take action on something that is relatively newly formed. And there's often crisis that comes through the action. It's quite reactive. It carries, not nearly as reactive as the new phase, but it carries this crisis in action. And for me, where the new phase is oriented to Aries, the crescent phase is oriented to Taurus, the first quarter phase is oriented to Leo for me. I orient these signs or the sign associations to, for instance, because the new phase is yang, it defaults to the yang sign that covers it. And we'll get into that in a minute. And that might sound a little confusing, but I have another schematic for that or another slide for that. And we'll move on. The gibbous phase is very Virgo in that it carries the energy of analysis. And we do have crisis that does happen in the gibbous phase. And there is an internal sense of doubt and an internal sense of lack that can come from the gibbous. But it is a self-perfecting and a perfecting process. The full phase is the phase of awareness and completion. And think of completion as in the full phase represents we see it in the sun-moon cycle, the full moon. We see the complete circle of the moon because the sun and moon are in direct opposition to one another, allowing the light of the sun to illuminate the moon. All right? So this is an attempt in this phase to bring awareness to us, to shine the full light of something on it, or to attract experiences that help us become aware of something that we are not currently aware of. The disseminating phase is society and societal conditioning. And this particular orientation of this disseminating phase is fundamentally different from, say, Dane Rujar's orientation of the phases and any other books that you might have read or lectures you might have heard outside of EA. The disseminating phase is about disseminating information in their world. In EA, this is about society and societal rules, societal conditioning, and I take it a little step further that societal conditioning also is connected to karmic conditioning. So the operative word for me is conditioning in the disseminating phase. The last core phase is crisis in consciousness. And so we'll eventually break these down a bit more, but the other phrasing for this is crisis in consciousness or crisis in belief, where we're breaking down societal conditioning and questioning now who we are and what we're doing. And the balsamic phase is a different kind of completion. This is the completion of the cycle. This is a place where the soul is beginning to, and consciousness is beginning to complete old narratives, old karmic behavior. I've often called this phase the compost phase. If you think of the cycle of a plant, and that the new phase being the seeds breaking the shoot, breaking through the earth, the instinctual emergence, the struggle to establish itself. And as we reach further into the full phase, this is where the plant comes to bloom. And then as it winds down and we get all the way over to the balsamic phase, this is what I call the compost phase, where the plant goes to seed and then the plant falls over, seeds are planted into the earth, and the plant itself fertilizes and nurtures the new seeds of the new beginning into the next cycle. Are there any questions at this point? I will take that as a no, but if there are, I'm happy to take your questions as we go along. So let's really take a look at our 4 aspects. Did we have a question, Leroy?
No, not at this point.
Great.
You're clear.
Great. Okay. So our main aspects that we're going to take a look at today are the semi-square. You can see it right here at, it's generally associated with the 45 degrees, but there are 4 semi-squares, not just 2, but there are 4. And that comes from the applying aspect. So that's a new phase semi-square, right? And then, all right, let me get back to this. This is where. Then we have a second aspect here at the separating, which is the crescent semi-square. And then we have, I put my arrow up there, but there's also one down here. I'm not sure why I put my arrow up there. I was probably tired at the time, but there are 2 sesquiquadrates, or 4 sesquiquadrates, pardon me, one applying and one separating on each side. So I'm going to put an arrow down here so you can see it. There's one here and one here. So that makes 4 of those. 1, 2, 3, 4. And on the semi-square, we have one here, new phase, crescent, last quarter, and balsamic. So let me repeat on the sesquiquadrates. There's a first quarter, gibbous, disseminating, full and disseminating. All right. So we have the phases below the horizon are known as the waxing phases. These are associated with the sun-moon cycle. As the moon increases in size, it waxes. And once we hit the full phase, these aspects, and phases, I should say, are known as the waning phases. And I'm sorry, every time I say that word waning, and I'm going to plant this in your head now, sorry, I have to share it. I think of Elmer Fudd. When he says it's raining, he says it's waning. So I always think of waning phases, and Elmer Fudd pops into my head. So now you can have Elmer Fudd in your head too. So let's go back. So hopefully that's clear that we have 4. So we also have 4 squares, by the way, that come in different phases as well. And that's another topic for another time. Here's an interesting schematic for you. Hopefully everybody can see that. This is the 8 phases with the 12 overlay or underlay of the 12 signs. So you can see where they fall into this. Because this is actually interesting. You can see that, let me get that back. You can see that at the 0 point, that would be 0 Aries. That's the conjunction. The separating conjunction is Aries energy. We have a semi-sextile, which is going to, at 30 degrees, which is 0 Taurus. The half squares, this is really important, and this is why I'm bringing this up. The half squares fall at 15 degrees of fixed. That's 15 Taurus for the semi-square down here that's waxing, where you see the arrow. Over here at the 135 degree mark, that's 15 Leo. Up here at 225, that's 15 Scorpio. And over here at 315, that's 15 degrees of Aquarius. Hopefully that's clear to everyone. If not, please let me know.
It is very clear, but I do have a hand raised on that, Laura. Do you want to take a quick question?
Yes, I do.
Therese?
Do I need to do anything?
Nope.
Okay, go.
Nope. Therese,
Okay.
go ahead. I unmuted you.
Hi, Laura.
Hi.
Hi.
My question is, from a karmic past life perspective, is the applying phasal relationship considered something that the soul has come into this lifetime to perfect, to work on, and versus the separating phasal relationship being something that the soul has perfected in a past life and is here to perhaps share that integrated knowledge with others through their life expression, the totality of their life expression.
Good question.
Good question. Thank you.
I would say that's very conditional, and here's why. Depending on the evolutionary state, depending on the planets involved, depending on a lot of things and a lot of criteria, I don't feel that I would make that as a straight across the board assessment, meaning that the applying phases are waxing. That's new, crescent, first quarter, and gibbous would be something that we're necessarily only perfecting. And the separating phases would be the waning phases. That's what I'm assuming you're implying or saying, which would be full, disseminating, last quarter, and balsamic, would be only associated with us having perfected it and then teaching it, mentoring it, or disseminating it out to the world. Particularly because the full phase has a lot to do with becoming aware of things. Let me step back and say this. One of the other orientations to take into account is that the signs and houses below the horizon and the phases below the horizon we could take with it would be subjective, and those above the horizon are objective. So the process of soul evolution through these archetypes and through these phases is a very, the orientation is internal to subjective. And we need the external world, as a matter of fact, to perfect in a way and to complete the process, to gain and gather information from the external world so that we can have our stuff, our shadow, and all our stuff reflected back to us so that we can do more work. So that I'm not on fully in agreement with that statement, though I can see some application to it. All right.
Great, Laura. Thanks.
Hopefully that answered your question. I will say this, that when we talk about applying aspects, so that if I have an applying semi-square, and let's say that our orb, which we'll talk about later, is, say, 3 to 3.5 degrees. And let's say that the orb of a planet, those two planets at that aspect, is somewhere around 3.5 to 4 degrees. This would indicate a soul that is coming into awareness of this aspect. And the closer it gets to the exact point when a soul incarnates into a lifetime where the aspect is what's called partile, where it's exact, this shows an immediacy of that experience. And so when the energy is applying, it's coming into consciousness. When it's way out there in the outer limits of the orb, it's coming into consciousness. That doesn't mean it doesn't have strength. And depending on the level of evolutionary, where the evolutionary state of the soul is at, that can be as intense as the exact aspect. So the more consciousness you have, the more awareness you have, the more sensitive you are to those energies. And so conversely, if you have a much more deeply consensus soul, we have, by proxy, by definition, we're going to have less awareness, less self-reflection, and less sensitivity to those energies, at least less conscious sensitivity. When the aspect is separating, the soul has passed the crisis point, doesn't mean it's past, and let me put it this way, it's past its most intense point, doesn't mean that it is less intense in a sense, particularly if the soul hasn't done any of the work in a way. And so so we can have energy showing that it's just coming in, and when an aspect is at its outer limits of separation, we can see that the soul is winding these things down. So hopefully that can assist you as well. I find it fascinating, and maybe some of you already know this, that the 0 points of cardinal in this circle would be 0, 90, 180, and 270. These are the cardinal points. 0 is Aries, 90 is Cancer, 180 is Libra, and 270 is Capricorn. Those are the cardinal points. Therefore, they are the solstice and equinox points. Capricorn and Cancer would be summer and winter. Capricorn, winter. Cancer, summer. Those are the solstice points. Your 0 points, Aries being the first day of spring, and 0 Libra being the first day of fall, which is where we're at. So these are very powerful in the pagan calendar. They're powerful in Native American. They're powerful, but not nearly. And by the way, in Native American, my understanding is the solstice points are their big power points. In the pagan cultures and the pagan traditions, it is actually the cross-quarter holidays that are the more powerful points. And these half squares are your cross-quarter holidays. And I will point them out to you that 15 Taurus is, pardon me, in May, and this is belting, May Day. 15 Leo is Lunasa or Lammas. It's at the beginning of August. Those dates were actually anchored on the 2nd, or around the 2nd of those months. But just like the solstice points, they should move. And the 15 degrees of those fixed signs generally happens somewhere around the 6th or 7th of the month. So the true celebration of those holidays should be at the 15-degree point, because they're at their most intense energy, and I'll get back to that. So 15 Leo is Lammas. In August, it's a harvest. 15 Scorpio. Now, you got a number of holidays there. You've got Halloween at the end of, that we've anchored at the end of October. You've got the Day of the Dead on November 1st, and you've got All Saints Day on the 2nd. I think I've got this correct. This would be Samhain. It looks like Samhain, but it's actually pronounced Samhain. And this is the ancestor holiday where the veil between the worlds is thin. And then you have 15 Aquarius, which is in February, and this is Candlemas, or oh gosh, now I can't even remember the Celtic name. It just went right out of my head. Candlemas is oh gosh, it'll come back to me. This is the dark of winter. Candlemas is the celebration that winter is halfway over and that the light is coming. And so this is this energy. Now, these 15-degree points of fixed are the most intense of this energy. Concentrated fixed energy. There's an immense amount of resistance to change. It's at its peak because fixed energy wants constancy, consistency. At its deepest core level, when it's not working well, fixed energy fears change. And so it wants everything to stay the same. It wants longevity. It wants it to stay exactly as it is. Nothing does, but that's what that energy wants. So that's where loyalty comes in, and all those qualities that are fixed, determination. But we get resistance that's also built into fixed energy. And so it's important to know that this energy is at its peak, and the potential for great transformation exists here at the 15 fixed points. But there's also an intense resistance to that change. So an equal amounts resistance to transformation is there. And so the fear of, particularly down here, when you reach 15 Taurus, that fear of death, the fear of annihilation through its polarity point of Scorpio, causes this resistance. I must survive. I must not change. And so it entrenches itself even more deeply into it. But these are very powerful points of energy. And if you have any planets at that 15-degree point, maybe you have angles at 15 fixed, or you have planets at 15 fixed, this carries this energy as well. All right, so it's not just operating in these aspects. So when you're looking at the degrees that this covers, particularly from the applying point of view, hopefully you can see this arrow. Let me move it a little bit. But at some point here, we reach the outer limits of the applying orb, and let's call it, for the sake of averages, we'll call it 3. So if we count back from 45, once you hit 42, maybe 41 and a half to 42, you're now into that phase. So anything from 11 degrees to 14.59 degrees of Taurus carries this intense resistance to change. It's incredibly willful energy. All right. So hopefully that makes sense, and hopefully you found that interesting, because as a practicing pagan myself, my circle tends to celebrate those cross-border holidays more intensely because they are transformational points, and we try to set circle and ceremony around trying to get it as close to the 15-degree point as we can. So if any of you do ceremony of any kind, I encourage you to think about and maybe start playing with moving those times to as this energy is applying to that 15. The sun is moving into the 15-degree point of those fixed signs. All right. So we were talking about orbs. Now this slide here was a handout that I made many years ago, and these orbs are small, and it takes a lot to redo these because they're done in a design program. So know that this is about as this semi-square at 2.5. You can, if you're a person that likes tighter orbs, and there are those people, they like their orbs nice and tight. They don't want any sloppiness. That 2.5 is that's tight. 2 would be even tighter, but you can allow those out to 3.5 degrees. Now, in a lot of traditions, we give a larger orb for the sun and moon or the inner planets, and give a smaller orb for the outer planets. But when I'm dealing with, I don't think I want yellow. Let's see. Let's try this. So that when you're dealing with what are considered minor aspects, we tend to apply them to all the planets. So you can see that the exact points of these semi-squares are at 45 degrees and 315 degrees. And then with the sesquiquadrate, you have 135 and 225. Those are the exact points of that. And again, you can allow this out to 3.5. Some of you might even take it out to 4 degrees. It's a very intense energy. So I'm not adverse to allowing those wider. But orbs, for me, and what I know of being in this profession and teaching and being around it for as many years as I have, I know that orbs are highly personal, highly subjective. They're an opinion. And I know there are those who are of the school, again, you don't allow big orbs, and then there are those who have the theory that you cast a big net, a wide net, and filter. So that, particularly when you're dealing with your orbs on your computer, if you don't loosen them up a little, you might miss one that's just over the edge, and then you might not see it, and astrology is a very visual element. So,
Laura,
yeah.
would you like to take a question from somebody?
Yes. Yes.
Judy, go ahead with your question.
Hi, Judy.
Hi. Yes, so I have a question related to what you were talking about before, in terms of your celebrating the cross-quarter holidays in your with ceremony, because you said it was the most fixed time and the most resistance. So how would that be a gateway or a portal for anything to happen if it's
Good question. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, as I said, it by equal measure. We'll need to turn off that microphone for a minute because we're getting a feedback.
Gotcha. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. So there's intense resistance because the potential is there and the energy is there for intense transformation. So what we do in ceremony is come up to that energy and recognize the inherent human psyche's need for resistance and fear, and face that and operate in the energy for that intense transformation. The portal is open. You have to understand, you don't have to understand, but here's the concept. Think of these 15-degree fixed points as intense portals of energy. The human psyche senses the intense portal of energy. It is an animal by nature, and it is, and particularly in fixed, it's going to be fearful of that change. That change equals death for fixed. So that's where the resistance gets built in. The energy itself as a portal is not resistant. We are resistant to it. Does that clarify it for you, Judy?
Judy, go ahead.
Yes, that's wonderful, because it seems to, in a wider way, it seems to say that in all cases and in every life, whenever we're feeling the most resistance is when we have the most potential for change. Is that
correct?
How that? Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
And somebody did type in Imbolc. Yes, Imbolc is the February 15-degree 15-degree Aquarius holiday. Now, what's interesting is the traditional names like Imbolc, Lunasa, Samhain, Mabon were changed by the Catholic Church at the time. They could not get the people to join their holidays. So what they did is they overlaid the traditional holidays with their rites and rituals, because the people were used to practicing their rites and rituals on that day. So Lammas, Mass, Candlemas, these are actually the Christian or Catholic names to those. And so in our tradition, we try to call them by their original names: Imbolc, Lunasa, Mabon, Samhain, so or Beltane. All right, I'm going to go over this on how to calculate a phase. I'm going to go over this. Does anyone? Let's just do a quick raise your hand if you do not know how to calculate a phase. Is there anyone in the workshop that does not know how to calculate a phase? Because if y'all do, we'll skip this.
Just go ahead and use the raise your hand icon.
Has anybody raised their?
Yeah, we have 3, about 15% of the group.
Okay. All right. So let's go over this. So when you are calculating a phase, you always, so let's start at the top, always calculate in a counterclockwise direction. This means you're following the natural flow of the signs. From the first house, follow the flow of the houses. From the first house to the 12th house is a counterclockwise motion, all right? And we always calculate from the slowest moving planet to the faster moving planet, all right? So we need to know the order of things, and I'm going to go over that in a minute. So, and it's also important to remember that you're calculating in a base 60. Now, before I go on, there are shortcuts, which I'll talk about in a bit. And for those of you who use SolarFire, I can pull up SolarFire and show you how to get to it. There actually is, in SolarFire, in their reports, a planet, what's called a planet differential, which will show the degrees that separate any two planets. It's very fast, it's very quick. But if you don't have SolarFire, then learning how to calculate them by hand is going to be important. It also gives you a sense of things. When you actually know the calculation and know how it's working, you can look at a chart and eyeball and know what you're looking at. So it's important to determine the faster moving planet and the slower moving planet, all right? So let me actually do this. Now, there are 3 versions here. I'm going to throw a modified version in, kind of throw a monkey wrench into the EA version. Now, the actual cycle of the planets is number 1. The moon moves the fastest: Mercury, Venus, Sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Chiron, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. For those of you who use asteroids, they fall between Mars and Jupiter, and some of them move faster. Within the asteroids, the 4 major asteroids, some of them move faster than the others. So Ceres, as a dwarf planet, would be right in the middle of Jupiter and Mars and Jupiter. The EA version is because the sun is the center of our solar system, which it is, that everything is moving around it. It becomes the reference point. Jeffrey is adamant about this, so if you are a purist, this is what you will use. My modified version, from years of experience and a lot of meditation and teaching classes and looking at the difference, because the sun does move faster through the cycle, along the ecliptic, it is moving through the signs. It does move faster than Pluto. So it is clocking around it through the zodiac. And because we are geocentric, not heliocentric, let me define those terms. Heliocentric would be you're standing on the sun looking out in the solar system. Version number two is a heliocentric view. Okay. Geocentric, which everything in astrology that we do is geocentric. We stand on the earth, we stand on the earth, and all our phenomena all our astrology is determined by our perception of astronomical phenomena. For instance, planets don't go retrograde, but because of our perception of where we stand, they appear to go retrograde. The sun does not rise and set. It does not move. We are not the center of our world. We know that. But from our point of view, we can see the sun rise and we can see the sun set. It moves along the ecliptic. So it is technically along that ecliptic, from our perspective, I shouldn't say technically, from our perspective, it's along the ecliptic, it's moving, it moves faster than the other, it moves faster than the outer planets. It technically does move faster than Mars, but after years of playing around where I wanted to put it, I did a hybrid to say that the sun is a very powerful point and it dominates the personal inner planets. That sun, moon, Mercury, sun, moon, sorry, let me say that again. Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars. These are personal inner planets, and I believe the sun dominates them. So I have put it there. So for whatever that's worth, you can take that or leave that. It is entirely up to you, because EA teaches number 2, and if you want to adhere to that, awesome. My personal orientation changed when I took a look at my Pluto Sun. I have a relatively wide quincunx, inconjunct, which is a 150-degree aspect. And in the EA model, I would have a full phase inconjunct, or a full phase between my Sun and Pluto. in my version, I have a gibbous. And after a lot of self-reflection, internalization, and meditation, I determined that I am a gibbous. Now, it could be oriented because I have a sun in the 6th, but it's just, that's just, I'll leave it at that. If you have any questions about it, please feel free to ask. So once you've determined which planet is slower, you figure out how many degrees separates it, separates the faster moving planet from the slower moving planet. All right, so let me see if I have an example here. All right, so in this case, you can see, let me get something here. You can see Jupiter and the Sun. Now, in my model, and again, I'm choosing, or excuse me, Jupiter and Mercury. Sorry, let's go with Jupiter and Mercury since that's the aspect. Jupiter is clearly the slower planet. It takes 12 years to go around the zodiac, go through the cycle. Mercury takes about a year. It's a little less, thereabouts. It follows the Sun. So it's clearly Jupiter's the slower. We're going to go in a counterclockwise motion, right? That's through the houses, following the natural order of the signs. We're going to calculate how many degrees separates this Mercury from this Jupiter. All right, does that make sense? Let's go back to this. All right. So now that we've determined which one's slower in our orientation, we have Pluto. Excuse me, I was looking down. We have Jupiter and Mercury. And so what we want to do is count out how many signs, how many whole signs separate. How many whole signs, not half signs, not partial signs. We want to calculate how many whole signs separate these two. So we see that we've got Scorpio's a partial sign and Capricorn's a partial sign. There's actually only one whole sign between these two, and that's the sign of Sagittarius. So if you write down, if you've got a piece of paper, write down 30 degrees. Now we also have to determine how many, oh, actually I skipped ahead. We have to calculate the remainder of the slow planet. What do I mean about the remainder of the slow planet? Jupiter's at 26 degrees, 53 minutes. There is a small amount of degrees that are left before it gets to 0 Sagittarius. It's actually 3 degrees and 7 minutes. Why do I know it's 3 degrees, 7 minutes? Because if I subtract 2653 from 30 degrees, I will get 3 degrees and 7 minutes. That's how much is left from that 2653 till I get to the 0 point of the next sign. So if you write down 307 and add 30 degrees to it, you'll get 3307. That's step number 2. So we get the remainder of the slower planet. Then we add the number of whole signs between. And then we find out, then we add, so here it is, count the number of whole signs. Where did I lose my arrow? There it is. Count the number of whole signs. We got 1. And then add the degrees of the faster planet. So what was that? The faster planet is Mercury. So if we take 10 degrees, 36 minutes, I'm looking over here, I'm doing my math. We get 43 minutes, 43 degrees and 43 minutes. That's the actual number of degrees that separates these two planets. And if we go back to our phase diagram, let's go here, we can see that the new phase is from 0 to 45. So anything that falls from 0 to 44, 59, 59 is going to be the new phase. So we know that if I have something at 43 degrees, it's a new phase. All right, so if you, there's a couple of shortcuts. Oh, I don't have the aspect grid. If you, when you're doing up your charts and you print and you look at an aspect grid, let's see. if I can get, I'm actually going to pull up SolarFire so you guys can see something. Let me just pull up today's chart, and I'll give you an example.
That's fine, Laura.
Can you all see?
Yeah, we can see what you're doing. You're fine. I just want to let you know you got about 4 minutes till your intermission, and then I'll launch another poll. Okay.
Great. And then we're going to come back and do all things semi-squares and sesquiquadrates now that we've got the foundation. So here's a good example right here. We've got a Sun-Venus semi-square. Can everybody see that? And let me see if this will work on here. There it is. So we have the Sun-Venus semi-square. Over here's the Sun. Over here's Venus. All right. So we can see that if we go in a counterclockwise motion, that the Venus is pulling away. It's in the waxing. It's one of the waxing semi-squares. Sorry about that. And we can look over here and we can see that it says it's applying. So you can actually, by logic, figure out which one it is, because if it's waxing and it's applying, it's by definition a new phase semi-square. All right. If I look at Sun-Mars, which also has a semi-square, I can go from Sun to Mars all the way around. We can see that this is a waning phase. Therefore, it's either a last quarter semi-square or a balsamic semi-square. And here again, it tells me it's applying. So by logic and deduction and process of elimination, I know that I have a waxing, applying semi-square, therefore it's a last quarter. So that's one of our quick ways of doing that. Now, for those of you who use SolarFire, let me show you real quick where this is. You have something called reports. Click on that. Slide your down here to select, slide that marker down, that bar down, and find the difference listing. You click on that. Now, this is really important. This modulus down here, sometimes it'll show up as 90 degrees. You do not want that. Make sure this sits on 360 degrees. And you have to find, now it shows the difference listings in two ways. For instance, it's going to show the difference listing from the moon to everything. Everything's going to be in there twice, actually. But you always want to go to the one where the slowest planet is listed first. So if you want to know the sun-moon phase right now, there it is, 195, it's full. Uranus moon, they're conjunct in a new phase. You can see it's 2 degrees, 36 minutes. Any questions about that before we take a break?
Okay, Laura, we're taking a look at questions. Anybody have a question of Laura before our intermission? Go ahead, Therese.
Unmuted.
Hi, Therese.
Hello, Therese.
Hi. Thank you for taking my question. Utilizing the EA technique, okay, when we're using SolarFire and we're looking at this 360-degree modulus differential, how do we take into, how do we factor in the EA methodology of the sun being the slowest planet? Because SolarFire's SolarFire's not doing that.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
I'll show you.
I'll show you.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so here it is.
Here it is.
Look, Leroy, can you turn that off? Thanks. All right, so right here, you can see the sun. Does everybody see the pointing arrow? Let me actually highlight it.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Can you see this list right here where the sun is the first point? So when you look at the Sun-Pluto phase right here, the Sun-Pluto is at 101 degrees. So that tells you the sun is slower. That's your reference point to Pluto. If you were using my method, you would go down to Pluto. Where's Pluto? Pluto's sun would be over here. So your method is sun to everything. So sun Jupiter, sun Saturn, sun Uranus, sun Neptune, sun Pluto, sun Chiron, sun everybody. And then over here, for me, using the outer planets, I would go Pluto sun, Uranus sun, Jupiter sun. Okay? Hopefully that made sense to you.
Okay, Laura, here's a question. Considering the asteroids in your modified version, you know, the asteroid belt obviously being in between Mars and Jupiter, how would you determine those phases and aspects?
Well, I'd have to ask for a redefinition of that question. Are we looking at the asteroids to other planets, or are we looking at asteroid to asteroid?
Aha. That wasn't clarified. Let's assume asteroids to other planets.
Well, just like the rest of it, you would, depending on your model, let's go back to let me get out of this. Let me just take a few minutes to go back to this. Okay. Sorry, I'll go back through all of this. Where is it? There. Okay. So as I said, there's my mouse. There's my mouse. Let's do this. The asteroids would fall right here. Okay. Right here. So in your model, come on, stay there. In the EA model, this is where it would fall. Put all your asteroids right between Mars and Jupiter. All right. So the sun would always be the center point to that, the slowest point. Right.
Right.
And then they would be slower to Mars, Venus, Mercury, and the Moon. Hopefully that makes sense. So to the sun, the sun is the slowest point always. But in reference to the inner planets, Mars, Venus, Mercury, Moon, these asteroids are slower by definition, by cycle. Now, I'm not sure what the EA model is to that and how much strength they would give them. I have not, but the only asteroid I'm currently using with phases is Ceres, which, because it's now a dwarf planet and it's big enough. I have not been using a lot of phases from my planets to my asteroids. That's sort of a work in progress to see how they're playing out, and eventually I'll have more work on it to see how it's playing. And everybody needs to test it. You need to test it for yourself. You need to know.
Yes.
Never just accept anything point blank. Anything I tell you is just my opinion. So make sure you're testing it for yourself, not just once, but many times. Check it within yourself. Check your gut. All those things are important tools for you to use when you're doing astrology.
Great stuff, Laura. Lots of technical information, and we appreciate it very, very much. Why don't you take a breath and take a little intermission right now for a couple of minutes, and in that time, I'll go ahead and launch another poll and engage the audience in that way. Okay.
Okay. So I'm just gonna take away my stuff, and I'll be back.
Perfect.
Put me on mute, or I can put me on mute.
All right, everybody. Laura's going to take her break now, and let's go ahead and check in with another poll, personal question here for everybody out there to respond to. How many semi-squares and sesquiquadrates do you have in your own natal chart? I'll give you a couple of minutes to respond. So take a look at your charts. If you're like me and Kim, we have our charts out here during a presentation like this, checking out some phases and aspects. And Kim Marie always reminds us to be aware of the phase first, the natural phase of two planets, and then the aspect second. And of course, in reference to Victoria's question about asteroids, we'll leave it up to you to include the asteroids to planets as well in your own chart. Semi-squares and sesquiquadrates. On a program note, I just wanted to clarify for everybody on the session today with Laura that we indeed are having Robert Gover's first keynote address at 1 o'clock today with Kim Marie and Robert Gover on time and money, past, present, and future. So that'll happen at 1 o'clock today. And then we'll finish the day with Tom Lesher giving his re-emerging the feminine as his read on the Lilith archetype. So that'll happen at 3:30 today. So 2 more great presentations coming up. We've had less than half people vote, so we're just kind of give Laura time to get back, and before we close the poll, give another 20 or 30 seconds here. And as another program reminder, if you have not yet registered for the post-conference workshop on the essential needs with Kim Marie and Mark Jones, Sunday afternoon at 1, registrations are still open and available. We invite you to do so. It should be a fantastic 4-hour event. Lots of information yet to come here on Astrology, Reincarnation, and Soul 2013. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll now. And we'll share some results here on Laura. The question was about how many semi-squares and sesquiquadrates do you have in your natal chart? As we tongue twister that one.
I know.
By the way, I can never say waning trine now without thinking of some kind of cartoon I watched as a youngster.
Yeah, Elmer Fudd. Elmer Fudd. It's waiting.
All right. Well, we have a lot of these important gateways in our natal charts. It looks like 63 out of 5 people basically have 3 or 4 semi-squares or sesquiquadrates. All right. So thank you for your input out there, Astro listeners, and we'll get back to Laura. Go ahead, Laura.
All right. So do I need to launch my video camera again, or is it off or on?
Nope, you're rocking and rolling. We can see you. I'm sure everybody else can as well.
Luckily, I didn't pick my nose. All right, so. All right, so one other quick thing about determining aspects and phases, or phases. If 2 planets are in the same sign, that's down here, number 5. If 2 planets are in the same sign and the faster moving planet is in a larger degree, just simply subtract the slower planet from it, the smaller degree, and that gives it to you. You don't have to count all the way around. It just, let's see, never mind. Yeah, anyway, you can get this. It'll be part of the, this will be recorded. That's all being recorded, right, Leroy? So this will be on the presentation. And if anybody wants any of these handouts separately, they can certainly contact me at lauranalbandian@gmail.com and get that.
Yes, we are recording, and the recording will be available. Yep.
Phase. And what I find fascinating, by the way, let's go here, is that there are 8 phases. There are 4 of these. There are for each of these aspects. They actually cover all 8 phases because there's 1 each of these in each of the phases. Where conjunctions only cover, you can have an applying conjunction, which is balsamic, and you can have a separating that is new. These half squares cover all the phases. All right, so when you're talking about any 2 planets in the new phase, these 2 planets have initiated a new evolutionary cycle. That's important to know. That just out of the gate, starting something new, and it's all about experience. That's a big key word for the new phase. Experience, experience, experience. It is not something, when two planets are in a new phase, just like Aries, it's not something they necessarily learn from other people's experiences, or to have somebody tell them about it, or for them to intellectualize or read it. They have to go through the experience of it, and experience leads them to know it is not this, it is not this, it is not this, it might be this. And the patterns are repeated, or the experiences are repeated over and over again in order to really figure out what it is and what it isn't. So if somebody says, well, let's just take a silly little analogy and to say there's a fire, and I tell the new phase energy, fire's hot, don't stick your hand in it. Well, as an instinctive new archetype, hot doesn't register. I don't know what hot is, right? You're just saying a word. It doesn't mean anything. I don't have the experience of hot. So I put my hand in the fire. Now I have the experience of hot. I know what that is, right? The problem with new phase at times is that it must then again stick its hand in the fire to find out if the next time it was as hot or hot was going to happen the second time. So it can be quite naive on one level, and it often repeats its patterns over and over again, kind of hard-headed. When we get into the part of, let me get my arrow. When we get into this sector right here, past the 30-degree point, and we are now into the Taurus energy, but it's still yang and still new, the semi-square, a semi-sextile is a place where there's adjustment. All right, these are two signs that are next door to one another. They have nothing in common. They have no element, no quality. One's yin, one's yang. They don't get each other by nature. So there's an adjustment that has to happen here, just like an inconjunct quincunx. This is an inconjunct semi-sextile. And so this is not the kind of crisis that a 150-degree aspect produces. This is a very nominal, in my world, very benign little aspect, nothing forcing any crisis. It's a semi-sextile. If you don't make the adjustment, nothing terrible, no crisis happens at that point. So I want you to think of this. The actions, the soul has had 30 degrees up to this point of experiences to learn what it is and what it's not, all these experiences. Now at 30 degrees, the soul's being asked and consciousness is being asked to make action more specific to a purpose instead of so random. The new phase can be quite random in its process. You know, experiences here, experiences there. You know, it's the ready, fire, aim kind of quality. Throw stuff on the wall and see what sticks kind of thing. And so it's very young, very instinctive. And at this point, it's saying, look, you've had all this experience. Now we need to refine it. We need to make some adjustments and make action more specific to a purpose. Because there is no stress if you do not, this energy builds. And we're now heading toward the crescent phase. And the nature of the crescent phase is to give value, meaning, and purpose to what was initiated in the new phase. And so if the soul and consciousness do not begin to modify behavior, modify experiences based on past experience, then pressure starts to build. And it's being forced at some point energetically to do this work. And it's going to be forced internal. Remember, crescent is yin. So now this is a process of going inward to determine value, meaning, and purpose. Now, this Aries, this energy at the applying semi-square is incredibly willful. I don't wanna, you can't tell me what to do, I'm not listening, la 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 la, you can't make me energy. It can be quite childish in its energy. It can be childish in its manifestation, but it isn't always. But the energy inside can be that way. I'm not listening, you can't make me. And you might not even see that fingers in the ear thing. They just might be incredibly stubborn and say, I'm not going to listen, you can't make me, who died and made you God, and it's highly willful. It wants to go back here. The natural impulse at these half points is to shy away from the intensity of it and to want to go back to where there was absolute freedom, because the new phase is wants freedom to initiate, freedom to experience, freedom to be me. And now the energy is calling it in to introvert, to assess, to give substance, to figure out the meaning and the purpose of it all. It'd be like being on I guess the analogy would be like, say you're on a stagecoach and you've got a wild team of horses running. You've given them their lead to run as far and as fast as they can, and now you're trying to get a hold of the reins and rein it in, and to give it some focus, to say we're going in this direction versus some random helter-skelter kind of thing. So this energy builds and it hits a crisis point at 45. You know, this energy can build, it can be, and it can draw crisis to it. It's not quite like the square, but it can draw crisis for sure because of that tension that's building. There's a tension that builds and a release. Squares and half squares build tension, then release. And so depending on their quality, if they're deeply resistant, the energy builds up much longer, and then the release is much bigger in that sense. The more they resist, the more they resist, the more they resist, the more intense the slam is going to be in the long run. When you get to the other side of this separating waxing semi-square, you're going to get a crescent. And I always think of the crescent semi-square as, how do I put it? There's a kind of petulant, I don't want to, again, I want to go back to this willful freedom back here in the new phase. I want to do what I want to do in the way that I want to do it. But now the energy cannot sustain its resistance to the degree that the yang applying semi-square can. Those yang applying sides of these half squares have the capacity, generally speaking, to stay in resistance longer than the yin side of things, because the energy is now internalizing, so it tends to collapse on itself much more quickly over time. And this is what happens with crescent. It will resist, and then collapse faster. And so it is important to understand that the crescent, in its need to find value, meaning, and purpose, is an internal process. And the reason it's such a struggle is because most of us don't know how to figure out our own sense of value, worth, and meaning on an internal level. We are looking to the polarity point, disseminating society, for the cues and measures and markers of value. And yet, because this is so subjective, no matter how much I try to meet up to societal expectations and societal norms, I'm going to resist it all the same. I'm going to struggle with that until, again, I resist, and again, this collapsing in on the inside, and it sort of breaks down and internally deflates, and it must go into itself and struggle in this process. Let's take a look at this example, two examples, one each of the crescent and a new phase and one of the crescent. So here is our example, 1:17:59, 6:23 p.m., Kennewick, Washington. We have a Jupiter in Scorpio and a Mercury in Capricorn. These are two yins, both about control. Scorpio's control is very different than and this has to do with the right brain, left brain, Jupiter right brain, Mercury left brain, and the interface with that, communication dynamics, communication dynamics, patterns, how we take in information. And this is a very willful individual, but because these are yin, and we have a lot of yin in this chart, we have a person that's not going to be expressing that willfulness externally, meaning that they're not going to tell people to shut up or get out of their face unless they're really, really pushed. This is a person who is really not interested in listening to other people. We have a lot of corroboration to that with a first house Pluto and a South Node Aries, which historically is not really about listening. It's about my experience. I want to do it my way. I'll do it my way. Just get out of my way. And so it can be, I think, quite isolating for this person if they are not open to listening. And the more this person evolved in their lifetime, the more the resistance became recognizable, and this person really worked on being more open and moving in and of itself to their North Node in Libra in the 3rd house to really be open to new information. New information was scary for this person. You know, wanted to control the whole narrative. This is a person who, when she decided she didn't want that information, wouldn't hear it, even if it was said out loud, was just not going to hear it. If there was something that was in school that she had to learn, if she didn't want to learn it, she wasn't going to do it. And there is a half squares, as my mother would say, cutting off your nose to spite your own face. So there's a lot of, with all these half squares, resistance. And so not being open to new ideas is in fact a self-sabotage. Not learning something because there's self-doubt in one's ability, Mercury-Saturn conjunction, resisting being open to it and failing is a self-sabotage. Does that make sense?
It does, Laura. Makes a lot of sense. Can I invite you to consider closing your webcam down for now? We're getting a little bit of latency, and then we'll bring Laura back on webcam during Q&A.
How do I do that? Oh, did you do that? Oh, I did it. I don't know if I did it. Is it off?
You did great, Laura.
Okay.
You're hidden.
Okay, thanks. So let's go. This is also the full chart with all the aspects in, just in case you wanted to see it. I isolated the one aspect so you could see it, but of course, ultimately and obviously, we cannot there was other factors that showed that there wasn't nearly as much resistance and as much willfulness in this soul. So, all right, so let's move on to our example of a crescent semi-square. So we have a male who's born December 19, 1984. At 9 semi-square of Mercury retrograde in Sagittarius at 16 Sag. And this person is pretty willful in terms of, again, wanting to control the narrative. And again, we get control the narrative because we've got a Pluto-Mercury. Anytime you've got Pluto in aspect to Mercury, conjunction, trine, square, whatever it might be, there's a desire to control the narrative as to why and how well they do it or what kind of consciousness comes with it. That has to be determined. But as he has resisted taking in new information that isn't of his own making or isn't of his own divining or isn't of his own discovery, he has drawn a considerable amount of conflict, Pluto, Mercury. I can tell you, don't tell him, but this is my son, this is my boy. And so I have a lot of information on him as to how he certainly operated as a child. And his his favorite saying was, "Mom, you're not listening." I'd say, "Yes, son, I'm listening, but you see, we just disagree. We have a difference of opinion." And so what was really interesting and what I like about the crescent semi-squares, even though, you know, steam would come out of his ears and it looked like his head was about to explode, he would take the time to eventually internalize and really try to figure this out for himself and really try to come to an understanding. I think it's helpful that this ninth house Pluto is there. I think it's helpful that it's mutability of Sun, Mercury, and that he has a Uranus-Mercury conjunction, the insights that really do come to him. But this is a soul that's really trying to rethink the thinking process, to rethink the narratives, to rethink the whole way he perceives the world, and that's a Mercury retrograde. To break out of old ways of thinking is a Uranus-Mercury conjunction. So this soul's been hammered. We can see the trauma signature of Uranus-Mercury. We can see the trauma signature of Pluto semi-square the Mercury. And so he has often collapsed in on himself, particularly when a narrative reaches its fullest, resistance, and it just collapses. I remember as a child, he would, when I'd say, here's the limits of something, you cross the limit, there's consequences. He'd cross the limit, and then I'd say the consequences, you have to take a time out, and not for 10 minutes or 20 minutes or 30 minutes. It would be take a time out until you've changed or rearranged or altered your attitude, where you're coming from. I want you to sit and think about this, so you will stay in the timeout until you figured it out. And he being, I think the fact that there's mutability and this is a crescent, he would in fact internalize, and he'd actually work it out, and he'd work it out actually relatively quickly. And he morphosis of the thinking process right as he was sitting there, and he would do this since he was like 3. He could sit there and I would watch it, and you could see him working it, and at some point, boom, he would shift it very quickly. The Uranus-Mercury kicks in, and he'd be like, okay, Mom, I'm done. And it wasn't, I didn't get the sense that he was just saying it to me because he wanted to be done with what he was doing. He wanted to get up and go. This was really, he got to that point where he could really figure it out. Okay, what is the point here? What am I doing? And so this whole trying to find his voice, this is a soul that's in a deep process of really trying to figure out what is the value of what I think? What is the value of what I have to say? Am I always right? Is somebody else always right? Can 2 people be right? Can 2 people be wrong at the same time? Or is it always just a right or wrong, black or white kind of thing? And I think he's really struggled with that in the way that he needed to struggle with it in a healthy way. And I'm not saying he's got it all figured out at 29, soon to be 29, but he's getting there. Did anybody have anything they wanted to say about either of these 2 charts? I'm really open to you participating in this, though we do have limited time and we want to get on to the other aspects that are fascinating.
No raised hands for now, or?
Great.
Oh, hold on here. Nope. We answered that question, so we can move on.
Okay. Let's go back to here. All right, so let's take ourselves over. Now we've come through, supposedly, we're going through this process of trying to figure out and struggling with the value, meaning, and purpose process, right? And there's a whole thing that happens with the sextile, with the quintile, with the square, and we get into our first quarter. Given, let's just say, one scenario is the soul has really come to a deeper sense of the value, meaning, and purpose of these 2 planets, the cycle in question, whether it's communication, emotion, whatever it might be. And now they need to put into action what it is they've determined internally. My mom always used to say about Leo and the first quarter, if you have an idea in New in Aries, you give it substance in Crescent and Taurus, you give it more substance and validity, you put in the wiring, you do all the things. Now in Leo in the first quarter, you're actually going to put that product into a test market. You're going to see how it works. And so it's like, okay, I'm going to put this thing out for a test run. You're going to find that not everything works well, because theory, now that gets put into some action and application, the crisis, that we become aware in some way. We go, oh, that didn't work. And so as we keep bumping into things, knocking into things, and people who have first quarter squares and aspects, particularly closer to the square or the sesquiquadrate, can be quite clumsy, quite accident prone, quite prone to bumping into doors and door jams and, you know, crashing into things, even just, you know, running into the corner of your desk over and over and over again. You know, and it's really, that can really happen a lot with the first quarter. And if you, of course, have a first quarter aspect that or phase that involves Mars, even more so. So as we pull away from this square, we get closer to the trine. And the trine energy is telling us, hey, things are coming together. You're working out some of the kinks, some of the bugs, some of the problems, making the process run a little bit more smoothly. And now this integration of this energy, and you're kind of feeling like, hey, I got this all. I got this down. I got this. This is working. This is working for me. And so what can happen to the side of squares and the conjunctions, we get hindsight through the experience. We can go, oh, I can look back and see from that experience that that didn't work, or I gained something from that. In the first quarter trines and trines in general, we actually have some foresight. But if there's nothing pushing us to do anything about it. This is not a stress aspect. So we can get the crisis of inaction. I've always used the analogy that if I'm cleaning up my house and I open up the closet and shove some stuff in, I might look at the closet and go, oh, that closet really needs to be cleaned. And I just close the door. And I can do this over and over and over again, and eventually I might open that door and something might fall out and conk me on the head. So that's the crisis of inaction in a way. So it's forcing us to not be complacent. And so there can be a kind of hubris, a complacency with the trine. The reason I'm telling you this is this leads to the sesquiquadrate. And I will tell you a brief story. I remember back in the day taking Jeff's classes, and he was talking about the first quarter trine. And he pointed out my Saturn moon, and I meditated on it, and to this day I still laugh, because before astrology classes, I used to say to myself, I'm so glad I don't have any problems with my parents. I'm so glad that's not my issue. I've got this all worked out. I would look at my 3 siblings who have Saturn retrograde and I don't, just having problems with mom and dad, always coming up against the system, always I was Miss Saturn direct, going, okay, I can, you know, I'll follow the rules, and then break the rules underneath and get away with it more than.
Uh-oh.
Under my Saturn, when I had the transits of Saturn, it brought home to me how much work I had to do. Am I still good? Am I hit there? Leroy, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, I didn't know. I had a little thing on my screen that said my audio had broken down. Okay, just want to make sure.
Yeah, just make sure your other applications are all closed down. There might be an email app open or something.
No,
yeah,
everything's closed down except for Solar Fire. I will close it down now.
Yeah, we've had a little bit of slippage, I guess, or flapping, whatever the terminology is. And so I guess that's a good time to check other applications being open for all of our webinar attendees.
Yeah, everything's closed now. Okay, so that was the only one that was open. I hate it when that does that. You know, you go back and you have to now go back through everything. It's just really dumb.
Oh gosh.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll go back to we'll go to this one. So this is where the ego at zero Leo can start to inflate itself. The worst case scenario, the unevolved pathology of Leo is to think that it is the sole source of its own creative power. And what can happen from the trine, if unchecked, if the crisis isn't great enough of inaction, this ego just begins to continue to inflate itself and reaches the first quarter sesquiquadrate. And so the analogy of this would be the queen who's been on the throne for a long time. She has the divine rights bestowed by God in her own mind, that she's infallible, that she will do no wrong, and that if anybody has a problem with that, it's not her problem, it's theirs. This is the hallmark of a first quarter sesquiquadrate at its worst, at its most inflated, at its deepest pathology. Now, this doesn't mean every sesquiquadrate plays this way, but I want you to understand the full extent of the pathology, which is to think that I'm going to speak in the voice of the sesquiquadrate. I can do no wrong. I know myself, and it's not my problem, it's yours. My father of his generation used to call women honey, darling, sweetheart, and during the time of women's lib rising up, which was awesome, women were really offended by this. And my father has some serious Leo action going on in his chart, and he used to say all the time that it was their problem. He knew his own intention. He knew where he was coming from. He wasn't being derogatory. It was their problem. They had a problem. And so, and I love my father, but that was one of his issues that used to bug me. So this full extension of the ego happens. At its furthest point, the skin of the balloon is very thin and very prone to anything disturbing it will pop and deflate the ego. So this is an ego in absolute resistance to internal reflection. Remember, it's coming up to the gibbous phase and this process of analysis. And this first quarter phase does not want to even go there. No, willful, I'm not looking at myself. It's not about me. I don't need to perfect myself. There's nothing wrong with me. It's everybody else. So this ego is fully extended and very fragile. And any minor self-reflection will cascade into a full-on collapse of the ego. We know that if we take a balloon and fill it up with a small amount of air, or a balloon deflates to being the rubber's thicker, it's very hard to pop those things. I mean, if you have to pop a balloon that's somewhat deflated, I mean, I've taken scissors and knives and run them deep into it, and you really have to push to get that thing to break. But again, an ego that's extended out to its fullest is quite fragile. So another metaphor is the house of cards will come tumbling down, you disrupt one. It's a very fragile thing. So the deepest pathology that can show up, and it doesn't always in this, is this absolute resistance. I'm not looking at myself. You can't make me. I'm all good. And so then we get into this gibbous sesquiquadrate, and we get the analogy would be of the queen who has reigned in her mind benevolently while the peasants are suffering and starving. She is benevolent and sees no problem with this, and so she is overthrown. Maybe they don't kill her, they don't lop off her head, they publicly humiliate her. It's really important to understand that Leo, and at this point this is 15 Leo, its worst nightmare is humiliation. Its worst nightmare is to be laughed at. Absolutely, there are two, being laughed at and being ignored. That's Leo's, but the biggie. Humiliation is an attempt to adjust the ego, which the gibbous phase is about adjustment, all right? Adjustment, analysis, perfecting. So we get this collapse. So what can happen with both the applying, I'm moving quicker because I need to. Crescent, in the first quarter, to take action, even if it's not well defined. I want to go back there where everything's working, nobody's pushing me. I want to go back before the trine. So we get this big push, just like the crescent semi-square in the gibbous sesquiquadrate. I don't know that I'm going to have time to go to my examples, but the one example I had was of a Mars-Venus gibbous sesquiquadrate. And in the relationship dynamic for this man, he was always, whenever confrontation rose up from his wife, would want to address something. This guy would absolutely shut it down. You know, this wouldn't be a problem if you weren't bringing it up. Okay, it's your problem. You got to deal with it. It wouldn't be a problem for me if you weren't bringing it up to me. So that would be the first push, and then what would happen is it would collapse in on itself and go to the other extreme. So if you visualize this, we've got the queen who's now been made the slave. This is the archetype. She's been publicly humiliated. Inside she's seething. I'm the queen. Who the heck do you guys think you are and what you're doing to me? And so she might rebel, try to come back to her old stature, hold herself big and strong, only to be humiliated time and time again. So collapsing in on itself, forcing the consciousness, forcing the archetype to examine its own actions. See, the hallmark here of crisis and action reaches at the sesquiquadrate, saying the actions, the need for them to recognize is the actions that I am taking is producing the crisis I am receiving. In their world, the crisis they're receiving has nothing to do with them. It wouldn't happen if other people weren't creating it. So that's that distancing and projecting of it. So again, they need to come to recognize that the actions they are taking are producing the crisis they are getting. And in the gibbous, they collapse in on themselves and go, oh my God, it is me. And what can happen is, because it's fixed and it's dramatic and it's Leo, it goes way overboard. So this guy would go, oh my God, it is me. I'm at fault. I'm horrible. I'm bad. I don't understand why you married me. I'm an idiot. I'm a jerk. You know, and it would just go way too far to the self-deprecating elements. But it would swing back and forth over time. And so the need for him to really reflect on his dynamics, the need for him to really reflect on his own needs within the relationship versus the needs of the other and the needs of the collective were really important for him. And this need to really make some adjustments about the dynamics and the power dynamics within relationships. Two more sesquiquadrates. We have the full phase and the disseminating. Now, when the gibbous goes through its analysis and it goes through this process, I'm not good enough, I'm not strong enough, I'm not powerful enough, I'm not pretty enough, I'm not whatever enough, is what the gibbous phase says. And so it tends to internalize all of that stuff and diminish itself and marginalize itself. So adjustments have to be made. That's not the story we're going into. But eventually the soul comes out of that sesquiquadrate and has to do a lot of work here in the Virgo part of the gibbous phase. Let's go on over to the full phase. And so now this is about awareness and attracting experiences and people in our lives, awareness to what it is we're doing, to shine the light on something, to show us something. The problem with the full phase is that it's too easy to distance. We're 15 degrees Scorpio, and we're cruising towards the disseminating phase. And it's really important to understand the resistance is to societal conditioning, societal expectations, societal norms. And this 15 degrees, building up to the 15 degrees of Scorpio says, society's trying to control me. The rules. You can't control me. You can't control me. Again, who died and made you God. And you can't be the boss of me. You can't tell me what to do. So an absolute resistance. I had this one guy, actually it was a boyfriend of a student, and she was telling me about him, and he felt that society was trying to control him by making him get a driver's license. So he absolutely refused. I will not get a driver's license. You can't make me get a driver's license. Well, fine, don't get a driver's license, but you have to deal with the consequences societally for not doing it. And so what he would do is end up driving in his car without insurance or a driver's license, trying to thumb his nose at the man, I guess. But he would drive in such a way as to attract attention. He was always getting pulled over. So it was really interesting that these experiences, forcing him and forcing, again, some shift of consciousness with respect to the ego. If you don't rules and expectations and the guidelines of society, You know, you can't be a dentist without going to dental school. If you do that and get caught, there are intense ramifications and consequences. So societal consequences are very intense here. And so there is a kind of, again, based on the sesquiquadrate, a kind of humiliation that the full phase sesquiquadrate often goes through. And it is, I consider the sesquiquadrates like a tenderizing meat hammer. You know, it's pummeling that ego, continually trying to soften it up and soften up the resistance for this intense transformation to occur. And again, how we apply this energy in a natal chart, I'm describing the extremes of it. What you have to do is take a look at the chart overall as a whole and try to synthesize this and modulate and modify the narrative to fit the chart in question. So hopefully that makes sense. So when and the resistance to them. You can't tell me who I am, can't tell me what to do, starts to rise up again, wants to go back into its unconscious place of letting everybody else. Is that it's just the rules of society. Once you follow, you know, once you become a doctor, nobody's going to be looking over your shoulder as much to tell you actually exactly how to do your doctoring unless you're breaking the law, unless you're doing harm. You know, so this is about getting through the process of the expectations of society and the societal rules and norms, and then allowing yourself to go along your way. But the disseminating sesquiquadrate's still hooked into that. They're trying to control me and define me and tell me what I'm supposed to do, and so it needs to get through that. And so again, pummeled down a bit more, it internalizes, collapses in on itself, and it begins to see that it's not as bad as it thought. And this 15 degrees of Scorpio applying and separating can be intensely self-destructive. The absolute, I would say, personification of cutting off its nose to spite its own face. I won't do it. I'll show you. You can't, you know, these rules are dumb. And so it ends up not doing it. But who pays the cost of not doing or following its dreams if it's not going to follow the rules? Society doesn't care. Society doesn't give a rat's ass whether you do it or not. Pardon me. So,
Laura, just a reminder, 10 minutes, okay? You're on a roll.
Thanks. Okay, so let's move on, but society doesn't care. So in the disseminating phase, it is really about seeing that and eventually awakening to the fact that society doesn't care whether you do it or not. You might as well do it and go along your way. Over here in the last quarter, we have crisis in consciousness and crisis in belief. Real brief, we get to the last quarter, disseminating square, and things begin to break down. We bought into the societal conditioning, we bought into the societal rules, it reflects some deep karmic conditioning, and we've kind of lost sight of that it's just the game to play, and it's become reality. And so we begin to question it. We become restless in the disseminating square. A quick analogy, if your family for generations has always salted their potatoes, nobody has ever had their potatoes without salt. So it's just what you do. And so all along you've salted your potatoes because your parents salted their potatoes and their parents salted their potatoes, and on and on and on. It's been conditioned. So you're salting your potatoes and something's not working. You're thinking, wow, this isn't quite right. Maybe it's the wrong salt. So let me get some sea salt. Well, maybe it's iodized salt I need. Maybe it's the salt shaker. So it's like rearranging the deck chairs of the Titanic. You're trying to figure out what it is you can change externally to make the old narrative work. And it won't. Eventually you begin to realize that it's not external to you, it's internal to you. As the disseminating is yin, you must figure this out. And so as we move into the last quarter, it really is a crisis in consciousness. If I'm not the person who salts my potatoes, who am I? Though salting potatoes sounds really dumb, if it's embedded in your conditioning and part of who you are, the minute you stop doing that, that triggers an identity crisis. Who am I if I'm not that? So this identity crisis starts to come in, and you begin to question who I am. And now it's about, in the last quarter, taking action, you take action in the old way, it produces that crisis in consciousness, crisis in belief, and you start to get into that quintile, new ideas start coming, it starts to begin to work, you're getting the sense of yourself, this individuation process can really arise, a sense of identity, you're feeling strong about yourself, and now, boom, you're being asked to break it all down. And that's what the last quarter semi-square is in resistance to. It's in resistance to completing, hey, I've just done all this work. Can't I enjoy it a bit longer? This sense of individuation, this sense of identity, this heightened sense of myself? Nope, nope. Now you're being asked to wind it all up, start breaking down the individual sense of self, and there's an absolute resistance to this. There's a willfulness. I don't want to go there. Each of these yang half squares don't want to go inside. They don't want to internalize. They don't want to reflect. That first quarter sesquiquadrate does not want to self-analyze. That new phase semi-square does not want to go in and try to assess its inner sense of value and what the value is about. The full sesquiquadrate doesn't want to look in and see, within itself what it's resisting to in terms of the societal norms and expectations. There's nothing wrong with working within a society. When we do it unconsciously, I think we get a problem, but that's another story. So here we have this last quarter semi-square that is intensely resistant to this internalized process. And we get over on this other side into the balsamic semi-square, and it wants to, again, revert back to this high sense of everything's working. Hey, it's working. It's all working together. Last quarter sextiles are humming along. They really work well. We almost don't have to do anything with them. And they're highly usable and great little aspects. And now we're being asked to now go within ourselves, reflect about the whole cycle, and clean things up. This composting completion phase is to complete unresolved threads of karma that have built up through the whole cycle that is numbers of lifetimes long. So I don't know how many lifetimes it takes to fulfill a cycle. It's probably highly individual. But nonetheless, there are these unresolved threads of past patterns, complexes, unresolved karma that have to be dealt with. And so this is a very Pisces phase of internalization. 2 planets in a balsamic phase, particularly if you have personal planets in balsamic, can also often feel out of time, meaning not out of time that the time is running down, more out of time and space. They feel like they're in the world, but they're not of the world. They feel like they're watching the things that are happening around them, yet they're not. It's almost like watching a movie. You've seen those stop frame commercials where the central point is stopped and everything else is moving around it. That's kind of like a balsamic phase in many ways. And this process of internalization and going deeper within the self and deeper within the soul process to dredge up in a way these unresolved filaments, fragments of past life karma. And again, this resistance to that is there, but the potential in all of these is very intense growth and very intense transformation. I'm sorry I had to rush to get to this last point, but I wanted to make sure I have 5 minutes. At least I could answer a question or two if you have them.
Thanks, Laura. Way to go.
That was a sprint to the end.
Oh.
I was thinking 2 hours, no sweat. I should know better than that.
It's a long time to present, and you did a wonderful job doing it. Of course, you've done it before, so you'll do it again. And thank you for the information. We're waiting for a couple of raised hands here, or anybody a question of Laura as we close her presentation here in the next 5 minutes. I have one comment. I'll never look at my Sun-Pluto relationship again. I think now, based upon a question I have for you then, in your modified Laura version of the relationship of the planets in terms of their cycles, if a chart had a 19-degree Leo Sun and a 27-degree Leo Pluto, how would you describe that phasal relationship?
So one more time, I have to visualize. So the sun's at 19, Leo?
Yes.
And Pluto's at
27.
A larger degree.
27,
Okay?
larger
So
degree.
in my world, that is a balsamic.
That's
And that balsamic issue is a soul winding down the issues of integration of the soul purpose with the ego purpose. And that given the level of evolutionary consciousness, this would be a soul that would be much more open to and aware of the integration of aligning the ego purpose with the soul purpose, versus a soul that was just beginning the process of this work.
Aha. So I will, my will, divine will.
Yeah, exactly. So Pluto represents the soul purpose. The sun represents the ego purpose. If you have a new phase, then you've got probably a bit more willfulness of the ego trying to run the show. It's ahead.
Mm-hmm.
If it's balsamic, the ego is much more aware and hyper aware of its smallness, but not in a bad way. Its smallness within respect to the larger soul process and the universal process, and is much more humbled than ego-driven. And it would be at a more end of the process of aligning, again, the sun purpose with the soul purpose, the ego will with the soul will, and therefore the higher will.
Thank you very much.
Right? And so when you're looking, for me, the gibbous inconjunct says, I can't do it because I can't do it. And the full phase inconjunct says, I can't do it because you won't let me. So with my Pluto sun and the direction of, again, aligning ego purpose with soul purpose, for me, I've always had a deep sense of that it's me. I am the limiting factor. I've always felt that I'm not strong enough. I'm not capable enough. I wasn't powerful enough to affect anything anywhere. I always saw myself as very, very small and unobtrusive and mousy-like. I know that's funny to some people who know me, but I'm not lying. I mean, that's how I felt, and that was my perception. I never felt that anybody external to me was limiting me in any way, that I couldn't express my power or meet my soul goals or because somebody wasn't letting me. It was all this internal, I can't do it because I can't do it. I wasn't powerful enough.
Sure.
I didn't see myself that way. So it's an internal limitation versus an external limitation. And I encourage, though I'm sure Jeffrey would probably be mad at me for doing this, but I encourage everybody to look at it. I encourage you to switch them around and ask yourself, you know, play with them, meditate on them. If you don't know it within yourself what it means, and then it's just a paste on kind of thing. You're just slapping on the meaning. And I want you all to be able to pull it out of something deep inside of you, so that it's integrated in you, and so that it has the impact on your clients or other people when you talk about their charts. So yeah.
Thank you very much. One final question here from Judy.
Yes, thank you, Laura. That was a talk with so much information. I'm going to have to play this one over and over. But my question is, it seems that of all the examples that you gave, it was good to have concrete type examples. It was all about resistance to change, resistance of some sort, or conflict with the way things are. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say that the initial ego response, the initial human response, is to resist change at this energy. But the nature of evolution and the energy pulls it forward, and transformation will occur. And transformation and growth and evolution is very intense at these half squares, very intense. And again, it becomes more intense traumatically the more the consciousness and the soul has resisted. It produces the equal amount of crisis or whatever to produce that transformation, to soften up the ego and the consciousness to allow the transformation to occur. And it just ends up, particularly those applying half squares, end up seeing that resistance is futile.
Well said. You might want to put up your contact information one more time, Laura, for everybody to see as we close the call today. And again, we've appreciated all of your conference lectures over the years. And of course, this is a great new way for us to consider continuing collaboration with you on these webinars. And again, what a great presentation. We're very, very grateful, and we appreciate you very much. So to contact Laura, everybody sees the telephone number, her email account, and of course, easy to find in terms of the NORWAC event nearly every May now for about 20 some years, right, Laura?
We're actually going on our 30th anniversary this year, and the NORWAC website is up and complete. So if you are interested in what we are about and what we're doing and what we're up to for our 30th anniversary, go to norwac.net and you'll see the full schedule. Registration is now open. We have advertising out in the Mountain Astrologer, and we hope to see you there.
Great. Thank you so much, Laura. And we'll let that be the last word. See you back here at 1 o'clock with Robert Gover's first keynote lecture. Thank you for listening, everyone.